Thomas had lived alone for nearly 2 decades. He was the kind of man who still folded his shirts crisply, polished his old leather shoes every Sunday, and believed that independence was something you didn't surrender. You protected. But on one ordinary Tuesday morning, that belief nearly shattered. It happened in the kitchen, a place where Thomas had made thousands of quiet breakfasts. But that morning, when the kettle whistled and he turned too quickly to grab his mug, his left foot caught on something. Not a rug, not a toy, but on the long hem of his robe. At the same time, his backless house slippers slipped just enough to throw off his balance. His feet slid, his knees buckled. His hip slammed hard against the floor tiles, and just like that, Thomas couldn't get up. He lay there for several minutes, stunned. Not by the pain, but by the fear. His mind raced. Is this it? Did I just lose everything because of what I wore? Later at the hospital, after scans ruled out a fracture, the doctor sat with him and asked a question he never expected. "Thomas, can you tell me what you were wearing when this happened?" He blinked. "My robe? My slippers? Same as always?" The doctor nodded slowly. That might be the problem. That moment changed everything, because what Thomas had never realized, and what so many seniors don't, is that the things you wear every day, the shoes, the robe, the waistband, they're not just clothing. They're either tools that protect your freedom or traps that slowly take it away. This is the story of how a quiet fall became a wake-up call, and how one man discovered that the path to mobility doesn't start at the gym, it starts in your closet. Thomas Wilkins was 75 years old, a retired machinist, a widower, and a man of quiet rituals. He lived in the same single-story home in upstate New York for over 40 years, a house he helped build 1 room at a time with his own hands. The driveway still had his old toolbox in the corner of the garage. The porch still creaked in the same place near the step. Inside, the walls held framed photos of his children, now grown with families of their own. And though Thomas lived alone, he never felt lonely, until recently. He was proud of how well he managed on his own. He paid his bills on time, kept the lawn trimmed, cooked simple meals, walked around the block every morning, even in winter. But what truly defined Thomas was his sense of consistency. His routine didn't change. Wake up at 6:30, warm up the kettle, put on his robe, the same one his wife had bought him 15 years ago, slip into his favourite house slippers, read the paper at the kitchen table, rain or shine, season after season. This rhythm was his anchor. He still wore the same belt he'd owned since the 1980s, still had his old work boots in the hall closet. Laces frayed, but soles still solid. He didn't believe in new unless necessary. His daughter Emily used to joke, "Dad, you're like an antique shop, classic but not always safe to use." Thomas would chuckle, "If it still fits, why change it?" But that was the problem. Things still fit, sort of. But they no longer supported him. The waistband on his jeans pressed tighter. The house slippers flopped more at the heel. The robe now brushed the floor as he walked, especially on the stairs. He ignored these small discomforts, wrote them off as aging. "It's just me slowing down," he'd say. What he didn't know was that these old clothes, the ones that made him feel familiar, were slowly working against his body, and that one misstep, just one, could change everything, which it eventually did. It had rained the night before, just a light drizzle, nothing unusual. The porch was still damp in the morning, and Thomas noticed the coolness in the tiles beneath his bare feet when he stepped into the kitchen. He moved slower these days, though he hated to admit it. His knees had started to stiffen, especially when the weather changed. His right hip sometimes gave a dull throb when he stood for too long. But it was manageable. That morning felt like any other. He wore his navy blue robe, soft, worn at the sleeves, the fabric trailing just past his ankles. His slippers were the same pair he'd had since his wife passed. No backstrap, just slip-ons with smooth soles, comfortable, familiar. As the kettle began to whistle, Thomas turned quickly toward the counter. That's when it happened. The hem of his robe caught beneath his heel, just enough to trip his step. At the same moment, his slipper slid slightly forward on the slick tile. It wasn't a dramatic fall, No flailing arms, no shattered glass, just one misstep. And gravity did the rest. His hip struck the floor first, a sharp, jarring impact that sent a wave of shock through his whole body. His elbows scraped the floor. The kettle continued to scream behind him, indifferent to the silence that followed. Thomas lay there staring up at the ceiling. He wasn't unconscious, but for a moment he didn't move, couldn't. His breath was caught, not just from the pain, but from the fear. How long would he be down there? Was anything broken? Could he stand? When he finally reached for the counter and pulled himself upright, the ache in his right side was severe. His hand shook as he turned off the burner, but what rattled him more than anything was the realization he hadn't fallen because he was clumsy, he had fallen because of what he was wearing. Later that day, his daughter arrived after he confessed over the phone. They went to urgent care. No fracture, thank God, but deep bruising. The doctor asked him questions about dizziness, blood pressure, vision. And then she asked something odd. "Thomas, were you barefoot? What kind of footwear were you wearing?" He explained. The robe, the slippers, the tile floor, the way his foot slipped, and the way the robe caught. The doctor nodded slowly, then leaned in. "Falls like this are far more common than you think, but here's the truth. It wasn't just your age that caused it, it was your clothing." Thomas frowned. He'd always believed that being careful was enough. "Watch your step, hold the rail, move slow." But no one had ever told him that his clothes, the robe, the shoes, the waistband, could sabotage him before he even had a chance to react. That night he sat in silence at the kitchen table, a heating pad on his hip, a soreness in his pride. He looked at the robe draped on the back of the chair. He saw it differently now, not as a piece of comfort, but as something careless. And for the first time he wondered what else in his life was silently making him weaker. A week after the fall, Thomas returned to the clinic for follow-up. His hip was healing. The bruises were yellowing, but the questions lingered. Dr. Rachel Moore, a geriatric specialist with warm eyes and firm tone, sat across from him. She asked simple things. "How's your balance? Are you sleeping, still cooking your own meals?" Thomas answered politely, but it was the last question that caught him off guard. "Do you still wear the same clothes you've had for years?" He blinked. "Yes, why?" Dr. Moore leaned forward. She opened a folder and pulled out a sheet titled "Hidden Risk Factors in Senior Falls." At the top of the list, slippery or backless footwear, floor-length robes or pants, constricting waistbands, ill-fitting shoes. Wearing one pair of shoes for all activities. She looked at him kindly. Most people think falling comes from weakness or clumsiness, but for seniors it's often the things closest to their skin that pose the biggest risks. Then she explained what Thomas had never heard before. 1. The aging foot. Why your old shoes stop working. "Your feet aren't what they were at 45, she said. "They've changed, and your shoes haven't kept up. The fat pad under the heel, your natural cushion, thins after 60, exposing bones and nerves. Nerve endings become less responsive, making it harder to feel imbalance. The arch drops, flattening the foot and shifting how you walk. Old slippers with thin soles, worn-out support and open backs leave your feet vulnerable, unstable and unsupported. Imagine driving a car with worn-out tyres and no suspension, she said. That's what happens when a 75-year-old foot wears a 20-year-old slipper. 2. Robes and long garments, a hidden trap. Next, Dr. Moore held up a fall risk chart showing photos of common home attire. Robes dragging at the ankle, loose pyjama pants, wide-legged trousers, slippery satin sleepwear. Thomas looked at the robe he had described earlier. It matched the image exactly. Clothing that drags, catches or clings in the wrong places changes how you move, she explained. At your age you lift your feet slightly lower when walking. Combine that with fabric sweeping the floor, and one missed step becomes a dangerous trap. She told him about reduced foot clearance, a natural part of aging. Even a slight shift in how the foot moves can lead to more tripping, especially on stairs or tile. 3. Tight waistbands. Compression that silently affects vital systems. Thomas admitted he still wore his old jeans with a firm leather belt, even at home. Dr. Moore shook her head gently. Your internal organs don't tolerate pressure the way they used to, she said. Tight waistbands can compress your stomach, slow digestion, worsen acid reflux and reduce blood flow to your legs. She pointed to a case she had last month, a patient who fainted tying his shoes. The cause, a belt that constricted blood vessels and triggered a vasovagal response, just like Thomas. Comfort isn't laziness, she said, it's preventative medicine. 4. One pair fits all. A dangerous mentality. Thomas had always worn the same sneakers for walking, gardening, errands, even casual events. They were solid, clean, well kept. But Dr. Moore explained the risk. Shoes are tools. You wouldn't use a hammer to do the job of a screwdriver. But most seniors try to use one pair of shoes for everything. Different activities need different support. Walking shoes, equal sign heel cushioning, flexibility. Gardening, equal sign side stability. Grip home, equal sign, anti-slip soles, easy on design. His beloved sneakers weren't bad, they were just used wrong. 5. The slow accumulation effect. The most dangerous part, Dr. Moore explained, was the silence. These issues don't cause pain immediately, they build quietly over time. The slipper that starts slipping, the robe that slowly stretches, the waistband that fits tighter each month, the knees that begin to ache not from age but from compensation. You didn't fall because of a single step, she said gently. You fell because of 500 mornings of wearing things that no longer serve your body. That sentence stayed with Thomas, because it meant that his fall wasn't random, it was predictable. And that realization changed everything. When Thomas left the clinic, he didn't just carry a follow-up sheet, he carried new awareness. His robe wasn't just a robe. His slippers weren't just for comfort. His belt wasn't just tradition. They were all decisions, decisions that, over time, had silently chipped away at his safety. And now he had a choice. He could wait for the next fall, or he could change, one piece at a time. That evening, Thomas sat in his recliner longer than usual. The heating pad on his hip hummed softly. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, but inside the house it was completely still. His daughter Emily had stayed for dinner. She'd made grilled chicken and steamed vegetables. They ate quietly. Halfway through the meal she set down her fork. "Dad, I've been thinking." He looked up. "Maybe it's time we start talking about other options, safer options. Maybe you shouldn't be living alone anymore." Thomas froze. "I'm managing," he said firmly. Emily hesitated. "I know you are, but falls, they change everything. We got lucky this time, but what if next time it's worse?" Thomas's hands tightened around his napkin. "I don't need a home," he muttered. "I need better balance." Emily's voice softened. "It's not just about balance, it's about being realistic. Your house has stairs. The bathroom floors are slick. You wear the same slippers from 20 years ago, and— Dad, you fainted tying your shoes last week." Silence. Thomas hated how those words stung. Not because they weren't true, but because they were. "I'm not ready for a nursing home," he said, barely above a whisper. Emily reached across the table. Her hand covered his. "Maybe you don't need a nursing home. Maybe you just need to stop pretending your body is the same as it was 20 years ago." That cut deeper than he expected, because she wasn't being cruel. She was being kind and honest, and it hurt. Later that night, after she left, Thomas stood in front of his closet. He stared at the row of familiar clothes, the jeans with stiff waistbands, the robe with the torn hem, the slippers with the flattened soles. They were his armour, his habits, but now they looked like liabilities. He sat down slowly, pulled a notepad from the drawer, and wrote 3 words across the top. "Change or surrender." He paused. Then beneath it, another line. "I may be 75, but I'm not done living." That was the twist. Not the fall, not the bruises, but the realization that he still had a choice. He could give in to fear, to fragility, to resignation, or he could fight. Not with pride, not with denial, but with strategy, with action, with self-respect. He didn't need a facility, he needed better tools. And the first tool wasn't a walker or a grab bar, it was a new mindset. Thomas closed the notepad. He exhaled slowly. His hip still ached, but something inside him had shifted. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we begin again." The next morning Thomas didn't just get dressed. He made a decision. He opened the closet with new eyes, not to reach for what was familiar, but to find what his body needed now. The first change was small. He took off his old slippers and slipped on a pair of walking shoes, ones with closed backs, non-slip rubber soles and proper arch support. He'd bought them months ago, but never worn them inside the house. Too stiff for indoors, he once thought. But now they felt secure, grounded. The robe was next. Instead of the floor-length one with the frayed hem, he pulled out a lighter, shorter version Emily had given him for Christmas. He had never worn it, still had the tag. It stopped just below the knee, didn't drag, and had a front zipper instead of a loose belt. He looked in the mirror, less like comfort, more like prepared. For breakfast he didn't just sit. He moved intentionally, slow but steady. He noticed that his knees didn't strain as much. His hip ached, but there was no wobble. He felt safer. Over the next few days, Thomas made more quiet adjustments. He went through his pants drawer and donated the ones with tight waistbands. He replaced them with soft elastic high-rise styles that didn't squeeze when he sat. He sorted through shirts and jackets, eliminating anything that restricted his shoulders, bunched at the elbows, or forced awkward movements. One by one he rebuilt his wardrobe, not around appearance but around function. At the shoe store he met a fitting specialist for the first time in his life. "You've been wearing a full size too narrow," she said, "and your arches need more support than they used to." He left with 3 pairs, one for daily walking, one for gardening and yard work, one for indoor safety. They weren't cheap, but neither was losing his independence. And the impact was immediate. His knees hurt less. His lower back loosened. He stopped holding the railing every time he climbed the porch, but the most noticeable change, his confidence. There was no more hesitation when stepping over the threshold. No silent calculations before bending to tie his shoes. No dread in slippery hallways. For the first time in months, Thomas walked around the block without stopping. Then one afternoon he went to the park. It wasn't planned. He simply felt ready. The air was crisp, the sun soft. He saw a boy, maybe 10 years old, tossing a football with his dad. As the ball rolled toward him, Thomas bent down, picked it up and threw it back with a solid, clean motion. The boy grinned. "Nice arm, mister," Thomas laughed. "Still got a little left." That night he wrote in his notebook, "Small changes, big result. Not in my clothes, not in my shoes, in how I feel when I move, in how I trust my body again." And it was true, because every time he chose a supportive shoe, a flexible pair of pants, a breathable shirt, he wasn't just dressing. He was arming himself with mobility, with safety, with freedom. There was no miracle, no magic device, just intentional choices, over and over again. And every one of them moved him farther away from fear and closer to the life he thought he had lost. By spring, Thomas had become something unexpected, not just stable, not just safer, but stronger. He wasn't running marathons, he still moved carefully, still took his time on stairs, but something had shifted, and not just in his body, in his mindset, in his presence. At the local senior centre, people noticed. The man who once skipped outings now came to weekly meetups. He joined walking groups, attended fall prevention workshops, not as a patient, but as a mentor. It started with one conversation. A man named Henry, 78, mentioned he kept tripping over his pyjama pants at night. Thomas smiled. "You know, I used to think that was just part of aging. Turns out it was just bad tailoring." They laughed. But Thomas followed up. He shared his story. The fall, the robe, the realization. The way he learned that clothes and shoes aren't just about comfort, they're about control. Soon others began opening up. One woman confessed she'd been wearing the same house shoes since before her hip replacement. Another man admitted his jeans left deep red marks on his waist after every meal. They weren't careless. They were like Thomas had been, loyal to the familiar, unaware of the risks. So Thomas did something simple. He made a list. Safe shoe brands with wider toe boxes, pants with soft waistbands and grip-friendly pockets, robes that zipped instead of dragged, tips for hemming long clothes to avoid tripping. He typed it out, printed 20 copies, then brought it to the centre and left them near the coffee machine. By the next week they were gone. The director of the centre asked if he'd be willing to do a short talk. Thomas agreed, reluctantly. Public speaking wasn't his thing. But when he stood in front of that small room and said, "I thought I was being independent, but I was just being stubborn," the room went still. He told them how he used to resist change, how he thought comfort meant refusing help, but now he realized that true independence means adapting, not clinging to what used to work. His words landed. People leaned in, nodded, some teared up. Afterward, one woman touched his arm and said, "You didn't just help yourself, you helped us all." Thomas left that day with something more than pride. He left with purpose, because healing wasn't just about walking again. It was about helping others stand taller too. These days, Thomas still wakes up early. The kettle still whistles. The morning paper still lands with a soft thump at the door. But now his movements carry a quiet certainty. His slippers have been replaced with stable house shoes. His robe no longer trails behind him. His closet is filled with clothing that fits not his past, but his present, and most of all his body, feels trustworthy again. Sometimes he thinks back to that morning in the kitchen, the fall, the floor, the silence. It could have marked the beginning of decline. Instead, it became the turning point. Because what Thomas learned is something every aging adult eventually faces. We don't lose strength all at once. We lose it through small neglects, the shoes we outgrow, the pants that pinch, the habits we never update. But the good news, we can get it back, not by doing more, not by pushing harder, but by listening, by respecting the body we have now, not the one we remember. Aging, he's come to believe, isn't about giving in. It's about adapting with dignity. Every morning, when Thomas ties his shoes or zips his coat, it's no longer just a routine. It's a message to himself. I still matter, I still move forward, and I do it wisely. So if you're watching this, wondering if your clothes, your shoes, your choices are holding you back, maybe it's time to ask, does what I wear still support who I am today? Because the answer might change more than your outfit. It might change your life.